The laughter died instantly. 37 cocky recruits who had been snickering at the woman mopping floors just moments before now stood frozen, watching her hands move with surgical precision. What happened next would shatter every assumption they'd made about the quiet custodian who had been invisible to them for weeks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Fort Harrison buzzed with the usual morning chaos as Delta Company's newest batch of recruits stumbled through their third week of advanced weapons training. The October air carried the sharp scent of gun oil and the distant echo of drill sergeants barking orders across the base. For most of these young soldiers, the M4A1 carbine still felt foreign in their hands, a complex puzzle of springs, bolts, and mechanisms that could jam at the worst possible moment. Rebecca Martinez had been cleaning these same training facilities for 8 months, her gray custodial uniform as unremarkable as the mop bucket she wheeled from room to room. At 42, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. The recruits barely glanced her way as she emptied trash cans and wiped down surfaces, their conversations flowing around her as if she were part of the furniture. "I swear this thing hates me," complained Private Jackson Reeves, struggling to reassemble his weapon after a routine cleaning exercise. His fingers fumbled with the bolt carrier group, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Sergeant Williams makes it look so easy, but I've been at this for 20 minutes. Private Sarah Kim nodded in frustration from the next station over. "Same here. My older brother told me basic training would prepare us for this, but nobody mentioned we'd need engineering degrees just to put these things back together." She held up a small spring that had bounced across the floor. "And I'm pretty sure this belongs somewhere important." The weapons cleaning station occupied the entire east wing of Building C, a sterile environment lined with metal tables and fluorescent lights that hummed constantly overhead. 37 recruits worked at individual stations, each struggling through the methodical process of disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling their assigned rifles. The air hung thick with the acrid smell of cleaning solvent and the underlying tension of soldiers who knew their performance was being evaluated. Rebecca moved between the tables with practiced invisibility, collecting spent cleaning patches and discarded packaging. She had perfected the art of selective hearing over the years, a survival skill from her previous life that served her well in this new role. The recruits' complaints and jokes washed over her without acknowledgement, their voices blending into the familiar background noise of military life. "Check out the cleaning lady," whispered Private Marcus Chun, nodding toward Rebecca as she bent to retrieve a dropped magazine spring. "Bet she's never even seen one of these weapons up close before today." His comment drew snickers from the surrounding recruits, who welcomed any distraction from their mounting frustration. Private Amanda Rodriguez joined the quiet mockery. "Probably thinks the safety switch is some kind of light dimmer." More laughter rippled through the group, the kind of cruel humor that emerges when stress meets ignorance. Rebecca's movements never faltered, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening that went unnoticed by the distracted soldiers. She had heard variations of these comments countless times over the past months, each one adding weight to a growing frustration she kept carefully buried beneath her professional exterior. The morning wore on with predictable struggles. Private David Thompson managed to launch his firing pin across the room, where it rolled under a cabinet and required 10 minutes of awkward retrieval. Private Lisa Park discovered she had been trying to insert her bolt carrier group backward for the better part of an hour. The collective incompetence was almost comedic, if not for the serious implications of soldiers who couldn't properly maintain their primary weapon. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres observed from the corner, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he watched his charges fumble through basic procedures. At 51, Torres had seen thousands of recruits pass through these doors, and he possessed an almost supernatural ability to predict which ones would excel and which would struggle. This particular group concerned him not because they lacked intelligence or motivation, but because they seemed to think their civilian college degrees somehow translated to military expertise. "Time's running short, people," Torres announced, his voice cutting through the frustrated murmurs. "Advanced qualification testing begins next week, and half of you can't even complete a basic field strip without consulting your manuals. This isn't college anymore. In combat, your weapon needs to work perfectly every single time." The sergeant's words sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the room. Advanced qualification wasn't just another test. It determined specialization assignments, security clearance eligibility, and ultimately shaped the trajectory of their military careers. Failure meant remedial training, delayed advancement, and the kind of black mark that followed soldiers throughout their service. "Private," Reeves threw down his cleaning rod in frustration. "This is impossible. How are we supposed to memorize all these tiny parts in their exact positions? The manual has like 50 steps just for basic cleaning." His outburst reflected the mood of most recruits, who had expected their civilian achievements to carry more weight in this environment. "Maybe we should ask the janitor for help," suggested Private Chun with obvious sarcasm, glancing toward Rebecca as she collected empty cleaning solution bottles. "I'm sure she has lots of experience with complex machinery." The comment triggered another round of quiet laughter among the nearby recruits. Rebecca paused at a table where Private Jessica Walsh sat staring helplessly at the scattered components of her disassembled rifle. The young soldier's hands shook slightly as she attempted to identify each part against the diagram in her manual, her confidence clearly shattered by repeated failures. "The bolt won't go back in correctly," Walsh muttered to herself, unaware that Rebecca stood just a few feet away. "I've tried following the diagram exactly, but something's always in the wrong position." For 8 months, Rebecca had watched scenes like this play out with increasing frequency. Each new group of recruits arrived with the same overconfidence, the same dismissive attitudes toward anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of military expertise. They saw her uniform and immediately categorized her as irrelevant, just another piece of base infrastructure they could safely ignore. But Rebecca Martinez carried secrets that would have shocked these young soldiers into silence. Secrets forged in places where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Secrets earned through experiences that most of these recruits couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. The morning continued with mounting frustration as the recruits struggled against both mechanical complexity and their own assumptions about military life. They had entered this training believing their civilian education would provide natural advantages, only to discover that book learning meant little without practical experience. Their weapons remained partially disassembled, their confidence thoroughly shattered, and their respect for the training process grudgingly growing. None of them noticed Rebecca's hands as she worked, hands that moved with unconscious precision around the very weapons they found so bewildering. None of them caught the way her eyes automatically tracked each rifle's condition, instantly cataloging maintenance needs and potential problems. And certainly none of them suspected that the woman they dismissed so casually possessed knowledge that could have solved their problems in minutes. The stage was set for a revelation that would fundamentally alter how these recruits viewed both their assumptions and the people around them. The afternoon session brought no relief. If anything, the recruits' performance had deteriorated as fatigue set in, and their initial optimism crumbled under the weight of repeated failures. Sergeant Torres had introduced timed exercises, adding pressure that transformed simple mechanical tasks into seemingly impossible challenges. 30 seconds remaining, Torres called out, his stopwatch ticking down mercilessly. In real combat situations, you won't have the luxury of consulting manuals or asking for help. Your weapon malfunctions in the field, you fix it fast or you don't come home. Private Thompson's hands trembled as he attempted to insert his bolt. Carrier group for the fourth time. The component refused to slide into place, catching on something invisible that he couldn't identify. Sweat dripped onto his rifle's receiver, and he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. Around him, the sounds of metal clicking against metal created a chaotic symphony of frustration. Time, Torres announced flatly. Only 3 recruits had successfully completed the reassembly. The rest sat surrounded by partially assembled weapons and scattered small parts, their faces flushed with embarrassment and growing anger. Private Rodriguez slammed her palm against the table. "This is ridiculous. We're intelligent people, college graduates, honor students. There has to be a better way to teach this stuff." Her outburst voiced what many others were thinking but hadn't dared to say aloud. "Intelligence doesn't make. Your fingers work faster, Private," Torres replied without sympathy. "And enemy bullets don't care about your GPA. You either know your weapon intimately, or you become a casualty statistic." The harsh reality of Torres's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. These young soldiers had entered military service with visions of high-tech warfare and strategic operations, only to discover that success still depended on mastering fundamental skills that required patience and repetition qualities their instant gratification generation often lacked. Rebecca continued her methodical cleaning routine, but the tension in the room had reached a breaking point. She could sense the recruits' mounting frustration, their wounded pride, and their desperate need to blame someone or something for their struggles. Experience had taught her that groups under pressure often turned their anger toward the most convenient targets. Private Chun proved her instincts correct. "Maybe if we had better instruction, instead of just being thrown into this blind," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "I mean, look around, even the cleaning lady probably understands these weapons better than we do at this point." The comment drew bitter laughs from several recruits, but this time the mockery carried a sharper edge. Their earlier dismissive humor had evolved into something uglier, the kind of cruel displacement that occurs when people feel powerless and need someone to blame for their inadequacy. "Seriously though," Private Walsh added, her voice rising with frustration, "what does a janitor know about military equipment? She probably sees these rifles as just more stuff to dust around." The cruelty in her tone shocked even herself, but the stress of repeated failure had eroded her usual kindness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca's movements slowed almost imperceptibly. She had endured months of casual dismissal. But this felt different, more personal, more vicious. The recruits were no longer simply ignoring her existence. They were actively using her as a symbol of their own perceived failures. Private Kim joined the growing chorus of resentment. "It's like having a librarian teach swimming lessons. Sure, she might know where the pool is, but that doesn't mean she can actually do anything useful with it." Her analogy triggered more laughter, the kind that feeds on itself and grows meaner. With each repetition, the mockery continued building momentum as more recruits contributed their own variations on the theme. They had found a safe target for their frustration, someone who wouldn't fight back, wouldn't report them, and represented everything they thought they were superior to. The custodian became their scapegoat, the embodiment of their fear that they might not be as special as they had always believed. Sergeant Torres watched this display with growing disgust, but remained silent. Sometimes lessons needed to develop organically, and he sensed something important was building beneath the surface of this situation. His experienced eye had noticed things about Rebecca Martinez that the recruits had missed, subtle signs that suggested there was more to the quiet custodian than met the eye. "Maybe we should ask her to demonstrate," suggested Private Reeves with false enthusiasm. "I'm sure she'd love to show us how it's really done." His suggestion carried an undertone of deliberate humiliation, the kind of public mockery designed To make someone feel small and worthless, the idea caught fire among the frustrated recruits. Here was a chance to deflect attention from their own failures while entertaining themselves at someone else's expense. They began calling out mock invitations, their voices growing bolder as pack mentality took hold. "Come on, teach us how it's done. Show us what 8 months of watching has taught you. Maybe you picked up some tips while emptying our trash." "Cans," Rebecca straightened slowly, her cleaning supplies forgotten. The recruits had crossed a line they didn't even realize existed, and something deep inside her, something that had been carefully controlled for months, began to stir. Her hands, still holding a cleaning rag, had unconsciously formed the grip position she had used thousands of times before, in places these young soldiers couldn't imagine. Private Chun stood up from his station, emboldened by the group's support. "I'm serious," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see what the cleaning lady can do with a real military weapon. Should be entertaining, right?" The room fell into an expectant hush as all eyes turned toward Rebecca. 37. Recruits waited for her reaction, anticipating embarrassment, stammering excuses, or perhaps fearful retreat. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would fundamentally alter their understanding of assumptions, respect, and the dangerous consequences of underestimating people based on appearances. Torres remained motionless in his corner, but his experienced instincts told him that the next few minutes would provide these recruits with an education far more valuable than anything in their training manuals. Sometimes the best lessons came from the most unexpected sources, and he had a growing suspicion that Rebecca Martinez was about to deliver one that none of them would ever forget. The custodian set down her cleaning supplies with deliberate precision. Her movements had changed subtly, the self-effacing shuffle replaced by something more purposeful, more controlled. When she finally looked up at the waiting recruits, her eyes held a quality they had never seen before, something that made several of them shift uncomfortably in their seats. The stage was set for a demonstration that would shatter every assumption. In the room, Rebecca Martinez walked slowly toward the nearest weapons station, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished concrete floor. The 37 recruits watched with a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed amusement, expecting to witness the kind of public humiliation that would become barracks legend within hours. They had no way of knowing they were about to experience something that would haunt their assumptions for the rest of their military careers. Private Chun leaned back in his chair with crossed arms, a smug smile playing across his face. "This should be good," he whispered to Private Rodriguez, who nodded with similar anticipation. Around the room, other recruits exchanged knowing glances and suppressed giggles, their phones already positioned to capture what they assumed would be an embarrassing spectacle. Sergeant Torres remained motionless in his corner, but his weathered face had taken on an expression of intense focus. Something about Rebecca's transformed posture triggered recognition. Deep in his combat-experienced mind, a subtle shift in body language that suggested capabilities far beyond what her custodial uniform implied. His fingers unconsciously tightened around his clipboard as professional instincts warned him that he was about to witness something significant. Rebecca approached the station where Private Walsh's disassembled M4A1 lay scattered across the metal surface like a complex puzzle with missing pieces. The weapon had been partially cleaned, but remained in the frustrating state of disarray that had defeated the young soldier for the past 2 hours. Various springs, pins, and mechanical components created a seemingly random pattern that spoke to Walsh's growing desperation. "You want to see what I can do?" Rebecca asked quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made several recruits straighten unconsciously. The woman who had spent months speaking only when spoken to, who had made herself invisible through practiced self-effacement, had disappeared entirely. In her place stood someone else, someone whose presence commanded attention despite the gray custodial uniform. Private Reeves snorted with barely controlled laughter. "Oh, this is going to be perfect." Wait until the guys in Alpha Company hear about this. He pulled out his phone, eager to record what he anticipated would be a moment of supreme entertainment at the cleaning lady's expense. Rebecca's response was to reach for the blindfold hanging from Sergeant Torres's equipment belt, as standard piece of training gear used for advanced sensory exercises that most recruits wouldn't encounter until their final qualification week. The room fell into puzzled silence as she examined the black fabric with professional assessment. "What's she doing with that?" whispered Private Kim, her amusement beginning to fade into confusion. The blindfold represented one of the most challenging aspects of weapons training, a test that required soldiers to disassemble and reassemble their rifles using only tactile knowledge and muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions. Without explaining her intentions, Rebecca tied the blindfold securely around her eyes, adjusting the fabric until she was completely sightless. The recruits' laughter died abruptly, replaced by uncertain murmurs and growing bewilderment. This wasn't the humiliating spectacle they had anticipated. It felt like something else entirely, something that made their earlier mockery seem suddenly inappropriate. Sergeant Torres stepped forward slightly, his professional curiosity now fully engaged. In 30 years of military service, he had seen perhaps a dozen soldiers capable of performing complex weapons maintenance without visual reference. Skill required not just technical knowledge, but an intimate familiarity with every component, every spring tension, every precise angle and measurement that determined proper function. Rebecca's hands hovered over the disassembled weapon for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to mentally catalog the scattered components through touch alone. Then she began to work. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, selecting the bolt carrier group and rotating it to the exact orientation required for proper insertion. The components slid into place with a soft metallic click that spoke to perfect alignment, a sound that had eluded most of the recruits. Despite hours of frustrated attempts, Private Thompson's phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor unnoticed. His mouth hung open as he watched the blindfolded custodian perform in seconds what had taken him the better part of an hour to accomplish incorrectly. The charging handle came next, positioned and inserted with fluid economy of motion. Rebecca's hands never hesitated, never fumbled, never searched blindly for components. Each movement flowed seamlessly into the next, as if she were following a choreographed routine practiced thousands of times until it became pure instinct. "How is she doing that?" breathed Private Walsh, her earlier cruelty forgotten in the face of something that challenged everything she thought she understood about expertise and capability. The woman she had dismissed as irrelevant was demonstrating skills that surpassed anything Walsh had witnessed during her months of training. The buffer spring and tube assembly followed, threaded into position with mechanical precision that spoke to deep familiarity with the weapon's internal architecture. Rebecca's fingers detected the subtle resistance changes that indicated proper seating nuances that the recruits hadn't even known existed, despite their extensive manual study. Sergeant Torres found himself leaning forward, his professional assessment confirming what his instincts had suggested. This wasn't luck or coincidence. This was the kind of expertise that came from extensive field experience under conditions where weapon reliability meant survival. His mind began cataloging the possible backgrounds that could produce such specialized knowledge. The pistol grip and trigger assembly came together with fluid efficiency, each component finding its designated position as if drawn by magnetic force. Rebecca's movements displayed the kind of muscle memory that transcended conscious thought, the physical manifestation of skills so deeply ingrained they operated below the level of active cognition. Private Chun sat frozen in his chair, his earlier smugness replaced by something approaching awe. The woman he had mocked as incompetent was performing feats that made his own training seem elementary by comparison. Every assumption he had made about military expertise, about capability, about who deserved respect, was crumbling in real time. The Front sight post adjustment required precise torque and perfect alignment, a procedure that had frustrated several recruits to the point of tears. Rebecca completed it in seconds, her fingers detecting the subtle mechanical feedback that indicated optimal positioning. The sight sat perfectly true, ready for combat accuracy that most of the watching soldiers had yet to achieve. As Rebecca worked, the room's atmosphere transformed completely. The earlier mockery and casual cruelty evaporated, replaced by stunned silence and growing recognition that they were witnessing something extraordinary. These young soldiers, who had entered military service believing their college education made them special, were confronting the humbling reality that expertise took forms they had never imagined. The upper and lower receivers clicked together with a sound of mechanical perfection, followed by the magazine release and bolt catch assembly. Each component found its proper place with the kind of precision that spoke to intimate knowledge of the weapon's design philosophy and operational requirements. Private Rodriguez watched with increasing amazement as the custodian she had dismissed completed procedures that still challenged her after weeks of intensive training. The realization that she had been judging this woman based on surface appearances, a uniform, a job title, an assumption about social hierarchy struck her with the force of personal revelation. The final components, pins, springs, and mechanical elements so small they often defeated the recruit's fumbling fingers, fell into place with practiced ease. Rebecca's hands never hesitated, never searched, never required the visual confirmation that the watching soldiers found essential for even basic procedures. When the last component clicked into position, Rebecca performed a function check that verified proper operation of every mechanical system. The weapon responded flawlessly, bolt cycling smoothly, trigger resetting with precise timing, safety engaging with positive mechanical feedback that confirmed combat readiness. The entire procedure had taken 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Rebecca removed the blindfold with the same deliberate precision she had displayed throughout the demonstration. When she looked up at the silent recruits, her eyes held depths they had never noticed before, depths that spoke to experiences and knowledge that extended far beyond the assumptions their stereotypes had created. Sergeant Torres stepped forward, his professional curiosity overcoming his usual stoic demeanor. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the respect of one military professional acknowledging another. The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon, heavy with implications that none of the recruits fully understood. They sat, motionless, waiting for an answer that would either confirm their shattered assumptions or provide some rational explanation for what they had just witnessed. Rebecca's response would transform not just their understanding of her capabilities, but their entire conception of how expertise manifested in the real world, and the dangerous consequences of judging people based on surface appearances rather than actual knowledge and experience. The woman they had dismissed as irrelevant was about to reveal a background that would make their own military aspirations seem like childhood games by comparison. Rebecca Martinez set the perfectly assembled M4A1 on the table with the same gentle precision she used for all her movements. But now the 37 recruits understood they were witnessing something far beyond custodial efficiency. The weapon sat ready for combat deployment, every component functioning in perfect harmony, a mechanical symphony that had taken her less than 5 minutes to orchestrate while completely blindfolded. Sergeant Torres stepped closer, his experienced eyes scanning the assembled rifle with professional thoroughness. 3 decades of military service had taught him to recognize exceptional skill when he encountered it, and what he had just witnessed transcended anything he had seen from conventional training programs. His weathered fingers traced the weapon's profile, checking tolerances and alignments with the critical eye of someone who understood the difference between adequate and extraordinary. "Headspace and timing are perfect," he announced to the silent room, his voice carrying the weight of professional assessment. "Magazine seating, Bolt extension. Trigger reset. Everything functions exactly as specified by technical manual standards. He looked up at Rebecca with undisguised curiosity. This level of expertise doesn't come from reading instruction manuals or watching demonstrations. This comes from somewhere else entirely. The recruits remained frozen in their seats, their earlier confidence shattered by the realization that the woman they had mocked possessed skills that made their own training seem elementary. Private Chun stared at his own partially disassembled weapon with new understanding of his limitations, while Private Rodriguez found herself reconsidering every assumption she had made about competence and authority. Rebecca straightened slowly, her custodial uniform somehow seeming less significant now that her true capabilities had been revealed. When she spoke, her voice carried quiet authority that commanded attention from every person in the room. 12 years, she said simply. 12 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment, specializing in direct action operations and combat weapons. Maintenance under hostile conditions. Her words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread through the assembled recruits. Private Thompson felt his carefully constructed worldview crumble as he processed the implications of her revelation. The 75th Ranger Regiment represented the elite tier of military special operations warriors who underwent selection processes that eliminated 90% of candidates and training regimens that pushed human capabilities to their absolute limits. I started as an armorer in 2008, Rebecca continued, her tone matter-of-fact despite the extraordinary nature of her background. Responsible for maintaining weapon systems for a 40-person company operating in Afghanistan's Helmand province. When you're 200 miles from the nearest supply depot and enemy contact is a daily reality, weapons failures aren't inconveniences, they're death sentences. Sergeant Torres nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in his experienced mind. The precision of her movements, the unconscious confidence, the way she handled the weapon like an extension of her own body, all of it made perfect sense now. He had served alongside Rangers during his deployment years and recognized the particular breed of expertise that came from sustained combat operations. Our forward operating base took indirect fire an average of 3 times per week, Rebecca explained, her voice steady despite the weight of memory she was sharing. Mortar rounds, rocket-propelled grenades, small arms fire that could last for hours. When your weapons jam during contact, you don't have time to consult technical manuals or call for assistance. You fix the problem in seconds, or your teammates die. Private Walsh felt heat rise in her cheeks as she remembered her earlier cruel comments about librarians teaching swimming lessons. The woman standing before them had faced life-and-death situations that made their training exercises seem like academic discussions by comparison. The blindfold technique was developed out of necessity, Rebecca continued, addressing the obvious question in everyone's minds. Night operations, smoke-filled bunkers, situations where visibility was compromised, but weapons still needed to function perfectly. We practiced disassembly and reassembly until we could do it automatically, regardless of environmental conditions. She gestured toward the assembled rifle with casual familiarity. This particular model, the M4A1, I've probably assembled several thousand times under combat conditions. In sandstorms where you couldn't see your own hands, in bunkers filled with cordite smoke, during firefights where taking your eyes off the enemy meant dying. Your fingers learn to read every component like Braille, understanding exactly how each piece fits and functions. Private Kim found herself struggling to reconcile this revelation with her earlier assumptions about social hierarchy in military capability. The woman she had dismissed as menial labor possessed combat experience that exceeded anything these recruits might encounter during their entire service careers. I spent 8 deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, Rebecca continued, her narrative painting pictures of realities none of the recruits had imagined. counter-terrorism operations, direct action raids, reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines. Our team was responsible for disrupting insurgent networks, eliminating high-value targets, and gathering intelligence that saved countless American lives. The technical details she provided carried the weight of authentic experience. She described weapon modifications that improved reliability in desert conditions, maintenance procedures that extended operational life under extreme stress, and improvised solutions that kept firearms functioning when conventional methods failed. During my fourth deployment, our convoy hit an improvised explosive device that destroyed our primary vehicle and disabled our communications equipment. She recounted, her voice maintaining its steady cadence despite the dramatic nature of her story. 3 team members were wounded, we were surrounded by hostile forces, and our extraction point was 12 kilometers through enemy territory. Sergeant Torres leaned forward slightly, recognizing the kind of situation that separated true warriors from conventional soldiers, moments when training, experience, and character converged under ultimate pressure. Our weapons had been damaged by the blast sand in the mechanisms, bent components, critical parts that weren't functioning properly, Rebecca continued. But we couldn't abandon them, and we couldn't call for replacement equipment. I spent 4 hours that night, using nothing but moonlight and tactical knowledge, restoring 6 M4A1 rifles and 2 M249 light machine guns to combat effectiveness. The recruits listened with growing amazement as she described technical procedures they were still struggling to master, performed under conditions that would have overwhelmed their most challenging training scenarios. We made it to the extraction point, she concluded simply. All 6 team members returned home safely, largely because our weapons functioned flawlessly during 3 separate firefights over those 12 kilometers. Private Reeves stared at his own hands, remembering how they had trembled during simple, timed exercises, trying to imagine performing complex mechanical procedures, while under enemy fire with wounded teammates depending on his expertise. After 12 years of combat deployments, I developed what the military calls invisible wounds, Rebecca explained, her tone remaining factual despite the personal nature of her revelation. Post-traumatic stress, anxiety disorders, sleep disturbances that made continued combat operations impossible. The transition from elite special operations to civilian life isn't something they prepare you for in training. Her words carried the weight of struggles that extended beyond physical danger into psychological territories the recruits couldn't fully comprehend. The heroes they had imagined from action movies rarely dealt with the complex aftermath of sustained combat exposure. I chose custodial work because it offered structure, routine, and an environment where I could serve alongside military personnel without the pressure of combat responsibilities. She continued, "This base, these training facilities, represent a connection to the service that defined most of my adult life." Sergeant Torres understood the deeper implications of her choice, the need for veterans to maintain connections to military culture while managing the psychological costs of their service. He had seen similar transitions among other combat veterans, warriors who found purpose in supporting the next generation of soldiers. For 8 months, I've watched recruits struggle with basic procedures that once meant survival for my team, Rebecca observed, her gaze moving across the assembled soldiers. I've listened to complaints about difficulty levels that pale in comparison to real-world requirements. And I've endured assumptions about my capabilities based on a uniform that represents honest work and personal choice. The recruits sat in uncomfortable silence, forced to confront the reality that their prejudices had led them to dismiss someone whose experience dwarfed their own aspirations. The custodian they had mocked possessed knowledge that could have accelerated their training by months if they had possessed the wisdom to recognize it. Military service teaches many lessons, Rebecca concluded, her voice carrying the authority of hard-won experience. But perhaps the most important is that competence, courage, and character exist in forms you might never expect. The person you dismiss as irrelevant might possess exactly the knowledge you desperately need. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, forcing each recruit to examine their own assumptions about worth, capability, and the dangerous consequences of judging people based on surface appearances rather than actual merit. The silence that followed Rebecca's revelation stretched across the weapons training facility like morning fog, thick with the weight of recognition and shame. 37 recruits sat motionless at their stations, each grappling with the profound realization that they had spent months dismissing someone whose combat experience exceeded their collective military knowledge by orders of magnitude. Private Chun stared at his hands, remembering how confidently he had mocked the cleaning lady just minutes earlier. The woman standing before them had survived situations that would have tested the limits of human endurance, had maintained weapons under conditions that would have overwhelmed his most vivid nightmares, and had chosen to transition into civilian work that represented personal courage of an entirely different kind. Sergeant Torres broke the silence with the measured tone of someone who understood the gravity of what had just occurred. "Recruits, you've just received an education that isn't available in any training manual," he announced, his weathered face displaying rare satisfaction. "Master Sergeant Martinez has demonstrated why assumptions about people's capabilities can be not just wrong, but dangerously stupid." The title hit the recruits like physical blows. Master Sergeant, a rank that represented years of exemplary service, leadership responsibilities, and expertise that most soldiers never achieved. The woman they had treated as invisible possessed military credentials that surpassed those of many officers they would encounter throughout their careers. Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but something in her posture suggested she was evaluating each recruit individually, cataloging their reactions and measuring their capacity for growth. Years of combat leadership had taught her to read people quickly and accurately, skills that translated perfectly to assessing character under pressure. The 75th Ranger Regiment maintains standards that eliminate 95% of candidates, she explained, her voice carrying educational authority rather than boastful pride. Physical requirements that push human endurance beyond normal limits, psychological evaluations that screen for mental toughness, and technical training that demands perfection under impossible conditions. Private Rodriguez found herself reconsidering every interaction she had witnessed over the past months. Rebecca's efficient movements, her quiet competence, the way she had navigated around weapons and equipment with unconscious familiarity. Signs that should have indicated exceptional knowledge had been invisible to eyes clouded by prejudice and assumption. Ranger selection begins with physical trials that most people can't imagine completing. Rebecca continued, her narrative providing context that helped the recruits understand the magnitude of what they had missed. 20-mile forced marchers carrying 60-pound packs, obstacle courses that require both strength and problem-solving skills, survival exercises in hostile environments with minimal equipment. She gestured toward the training facility around them. This room, these weapons, these controlled exercises, they represent the elementary foundation of military capability. Real combat operations require levels of expertise, adaptability, and mental toughness that can only be developed through sustained exposure to genuine danger. Private Thompson struggled to process the disconnect between Rebecca's extraordinary background and her current role. The cognitive dissonance of a decorated special operations veteran choosing custodial work challenged his understanding of career progression and social hierarchy. "Why custodial work?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question voiced what everyone was thinking, but had been afraid to ask a query that required delicate navigation of personal territory and potential trauma. Rebecca's expression softened slightly, revealing glimpses of vulnerability beneath her professional composure. "Combat deployment changes you in ways that civilians can't understand," she explained, her tone becoming more personal. 12 years of life and death decisions, of watching teammates get injured or killed, of operating under constant stress. It leaves psychological marks that don't disappear when you return home. The recruits listened with growing comprehension as she described the invisible wounds that accompanied many veterans' transitions to civilian life. Sleep disorders that made rest impossible, hypervigilance that turned routine activities into exhausting exercises in threat assessment, social anxiety that made normal interactions feel like tactical operations. I tried traditional careers after leaving the Rangers, Rebecca continued. Corporate security positions, law enforcement, private military contracting. But each of these environments triggered psychological responses that made sustained performance difficult. The pressure, the competition, the need to constantly prove competence, it became overwhelming. Sergeant Torres nodded with understanding born of his own experience watching combat veterans struggle with reintegration. The transition from military service to civilian life represented one of the greatest challenges facing modern veterans, particularly those who had served in elite units under extreme conditions. Custodial work offered something different, Rebecca explained. Structure without pressure, routine without competition, an environment where I could serve alongside military personnel without bearing direct responsibility for their lives. It provided the stability I needed while maintaining connection to the community that had defined most of my adult life. Private Walsh felt shame wash over her as she remembered her cruel comments about librarians teaching swimming lessons. The woman before them had made deliberate choices based on self-knowledge and personal, healing decisions that required courage and wisdom that Walsh was only beginning to understand. "But why didn't you tell anyone?" asked Private Kim, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "Why allow us to treat you as if you were just—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence without acknowledging the cruelty of their collective behavior. Rebecca's response revealed depths of character that extended beyond military expertise. "Because respect that depends on rank or credentials isn't real respect," she said simply. "True respect comes from recognizing someone's humanity and treating them with dignity regardless of their background or circumstances." The lesson landed with devastating accuracy. The recruits realized they had failed a test they hadn't known they were taking, a character assessment that revealed more about their values than any written examination could have measured. "You've all been focused on your own struggles with weapons training," Rebecca observed, her tone becoming instructional. "But you've missed opportunities to learn from every person you've encountered on this site. The maintenance staff who keep your equipment functioning, the kitchen personnel who ensure your nutrition, the administrative workers who manage your records. Each of them possesses knowledge and experience that could enhance your military development." Private Reeves found himself thinking about other base personnel he had dismissed or ignored, wondering what expertise he had overlooked due to narrow assumptions about military hierarchy and social status. Elite military units succeed because they recognize that competence exists at every level, Rebecca continued. The supply specialist who ensures ammunition availability, the communications technician who maintains contact with headquarters, the medic who provides emergency care. Each role requires specialized knowledge that contributes to mission success. She gestured toward their scattered weapons and failed reassembly attempts. "Your struggles with basic procedures aren't unusual or shameful. What's concerning is your assumption that difficulty justifies disrespect toward people who might help you improve. Every person you've dismissed as irrelevant possesses hard-won knowledge that could accelerate your learning if you possess the wisdom to recognize it." The recruits absorbed this lesson with a growing understanding of how fundamentally they had misunderstood the nature of military service and human capability. Their college educations and civilian achievements, which they had expected to provide automatic advantages, had instead created blind spots that limited their ability to learn from available resources. Master Sergeant Martinez, Sergeant Torres, interjected, using her proper military title with deliberate emphasis. Would you be willing to provide additional instruction to these recruits? I believe they could benefit significantly from your expertise." Rebecca considered the request carefully, her gaze moving across the assembled soldiers with evaluative precision. "That depends," she replied, "on whether they're prepared to learn from someone they've spent months treating as invisible. Real education requires respect, humility, and recognition that expertise takes many forms." The challenge in her words was unmistakable. She was offering them an opportunity to recover from their failure of character, but only if they could demonstrate genuine growth and understanding of the lessons they had learned. Private Chun stood slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching humility. "Master Sergeant Martinez," he said formally, "I apologize for my behavior and my assumptions. I would be honored to learn from your experience. If you're willing to teach someone who has clearly demonstrated poor judgment." His apology opened floodgates of similar acknowledgments from other recruits, each expressing shame for their treatment of someone whose service record dwarfed their own military aspirations. The collective recognition of their failure created space for genuine growth and transformation. Rebecca's expression softened as she witnessed their honest remorse and apparent willingness to change. "Very well," she agreed. "But understand that my instruction will require different standards than you've experienced. Combat-proven techniques, realistic expectations, and absolute respect for every person who contributes to military effectiveness." Recruits nodded eagerly, finally understanding that they were being offered access to knowledge that could transform their military careers. The woman they had dismissed as irrelevant was about to become their most valuable instructor if they could prove worthy of her time and expertise. As Rebecca began organizing an impromptu advanced training session, the broader implications of their experience settled over the recruits like morning sunshine. They had learned lessons about assumptions, respect, and human dignity that would influence their military service and personal character for decades to come. The weapons training facility, which had been the site of their collective failure just hours earlier, was about to become the classroom where they would discover what real military excellence looked like, taught by someone who had earned the right to demand their absolute attention and respect. Rebecca Martinez surveyed the transformed atmosphere in the weapons training facility with the practiced eye of someone who had led soldiers through far more challenging circumstances. The shame-faced recruits who had mocked her just an hour earlier now waited with genuine attention, their earlier arrogance replaced by the kind of focused anticipation that marked teachable moments in military development. "Before we begin," she announced, her voice carrying the authority that comes from combat-tested leadership, "you need to understand that everything you think you know about weapons maintenance is probably incomplete or incorrect. Your manuals provide basic procedures, but real-world application requires knowledge that can only be gained through experience under pressure." She moved to the nearest disassembled rifle, her hands already assessing the scattered components with professional efficiency. This M4A1 carbine represents American military engineering at its finest, but it's also a complex mechanical system with over 150 individual parts. Each component serves specific functions, and understanding those relationships is crucial for maintaining combat effectiveness. Private Thompson leaned forward, eager to absorb knowledge that might accelerate his frustrated learning curve. The woman who had seemed invisible just hours earlier was about to provide instruction that could transform his military career if he possessed the wisdom to listen carefully and apply her teachings. "The first mistake most soldiers make," Rebecca continued, lifting the bolt carrier group with familiar precision, "is treating weapons maintenance as a mechanical procedure rather than a diagnostic art. You follow steps from a manual without understanding why each action is necessary or what signs indicate potential problems." She rotated the component to display wear patterns invisible to untrained eyes. "Look at these surfaces, the scoring on the bolt extension, the discoloration around the gas key. the subtle wear marks on the cam pin. Each of these tells a story about how this weapon has been used, maintained, and what problems might develop in the future. Sergeant Torres watched with professional appreciation as Rebecca demonstrated expertise that exceeded his own considerable knowledge. Her instruction style reflected the kind of hard-won wisdom that could only be developed through sustained exposure to life-and-death situations where weapons failures meant casualties. Combat maintenance differs fundamentally from training facility procedures, she explained, beginning a field stripping demonstration that revealed techniques the recruits had never encountered. In Afghanistan, you might need to clear a malfunction while taking enemy fire, using only one hand because the other is applying pressure to a teammate's wound. Standard procedures become inadequate when survival depends on speed and adaptability. Private Rodriguez found herself taking mental notes with desperate intensity, recognizing that she was receiving instruction unavailable through conventional military training programs. The woman before her had maintained weapons under conditions that would have challenged the most experienced armorers, and her knowledge could bridge the gap between academic theory and practical application. "Watch my finger placement," Rebecca directed, disassembling the weapon with fluid efficiency that made complex procedures appear effortless. The angle of approach for each component, the amount of pressure required, the subtle resistance changes that indicate proper seating, these details determine whether your weapon functions flawlessly or fails when you need it most. She completed the disassembly in under 30 seconds, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next with choreographed precision. The recruits watched in amazement as she demonstrated techniques that compressed hours of their frustrated efforts into moments of elegant efficiency. "Now observe the reassembly process," she continued, her hands beginning the reverse procedure with identical smoothness. Each component has an optimal insertion sequence that minimizes stress on mechanical tolerances. Following this sequence ensures proper function and extends operational life under harsh conditions. Private Kim marveled at the way Rebecca's fingers seemed to read each component through touch alone, detecting alignments and resistances that remained invisible to less experienced hands. The blindfolded demonstration had been impressive, but this detailed instruction revealed the underlying knowledge that made such expertise possible. "The bolt carrier group requires specific orientation during installation," Rebecca explained, demonstrating the precise angle that allowed smooth insertion. "Most soldiers force the component when it meets resistance, causing wear damage that accumulates over time. Proper technique eliminates force through correct positioning and timing." She guided the bolt into battery position with gentle pressure. That spoke to intimate familiarity with the weapon's mechanical characteristics. Feel the resistance points, understand what they indicate, and respond with appropriate technique rather than brute force. Your weapon is a precision instrument that deserves respect and understanding. Private Walsh struggled to reconcile this patient, knowledgeable instructor with the woman she had mocked so cruelly earlier. Rebecca's teaching style combined technical expertise with genuine care for her students, development qualities that revealed character depths Walsh was only beginning to appreciate. Combat environments present challenges that training facilities can't replicate. Rebecca continued, moving into advanced instruction that addressed real-world applications. Sand infiltration that jams moving parts, extreme temperatures that affect metallurgy, moisture that promotes corrosion. Each condition requires modified maintenance procedures that aren't covered in standard manuals. She demonstrated cleaning techniques adapted for desert operations, showing how to remove sand particles from critical mechanisms without damaging precision surfaces. Her methods reflected hard-won experience maintaining weapons under conditions where conventional procedures proved inadequate. "During my third deployment, our unit operated in an area where dust storms occurred almost daily," she recounted, her narrative providing context for the specialized techniques she was demonstrating. Standard cleaning procedures proved insufficient for removing fine particles that infiltrated every mechanism. We developed modified methods that maintained weapon function despite environmental extremes. The recruits listened with growing appreciation for the complexity of real-world military operations. Their training facility exercises, which had seemed challenging just hours earlier, paled in comparison to the conditions Rebecca described with matter-of-fact precision. Temperature variations create expansion and contraction cycles that affect component tolerances, she explained, adjusting the headspace with micro-precise movements that demonstrated expert knowledge of metallurgical principles. Weapons maintained in heated buildings and then deployed in sub-zero conditions experience mechanical stress that can cause failures if not properly addressed. Private Chen found himself reconsidering his entire approach to military service as he absorbed instruction that revealed depths of complexity he had never imagined. The woman he had dismissed as irrelevant possessed knowledge that could enhance his capabilities in ways he was only beginning to understand. Lubrication techniques vary dramatically based on the operational environment. Rebecca continued, applying cleaning compounds with surgical precision. Desert operations require lubricants that resist sand infiltration, while jungle environments demand products that prevent moisture-induced corrosion. Using inappropriate lubrication can cause more problems than using none at all. She demonstrated application methods that ensured optimal distribution while minimizing excess that could attract contaminants. Each technique reflected practical experience, maintaining weapons under conditions where failure wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially fatal. Advanced troubleshooting requires understanding mechanical relationships between components. She explained, inducing a deliberate malfunction and then diagnosing the cause through systematic analysis. Symptoms might appear in one area while the actual problem exists elsewhere. Effective diagnosis demands knowledge of how each part affects overall function. Private Reeves watched with fascination as Rebecca identified the source of the malfunction. Within seconds, her analysis revealing expertise that made his own troubleshooting attempts seem elementary. The woman who had been invisible to him for months possessed capabilities that exceeded those of most military instructors he had encountered. Preventive maintenance extends beyond cleaning and lubrication. She continued, examining wear patterns with professional thoroughness. Understanding component life cycles, recognizing early warning signs of impending failures, and scheduling replacements before critical breakdowns occur. These skills separate competent soldiers from exceptional ones. Her instruction covered topics that wouldn't be addressed in conventional training programs for months or years, compressed into an intensive session that provided insights normally gained only through extensive field experience. The relationship between weapons maintenance and marksmanship is more intimate than most soldiers realize, Rebecca explained, adjusting the weapon's sights with minute precision. A properly maintained rifle shooting quality ammunition should achieve consistent accuracy that reflects the shooter's skill rather than mechanical limitations. She demonstrated sight adjustment techniques that revealed how microscopic changes could dramatically affect point of impact at extended ranges. Her knowledge encompassed not just mechanical maintenance, but the ballistic principles that determined combat effectiveness. Understanding your weapon's capabilities and limitations prevents unrealistic expectations that can prove dangerous in combat. She continued, her instruction taking on the urgency of someone who had seen soldiers die due to inadequate knowledge. Knowing maximum effective ranges, penetration capabilities, and accuracy standards helps you make tactical decisions that enhance survival probability. The recruits absorbed these lessons with growing recognition that they were receiving instruction that could literally save their lives in future deployments. The woman they had treated as irrelevant was providing education that transcended their immediate training requirements and addressed the fundamental skills necessary for combat survival. As the intensive session continued, Rebecca's teaching revealed not just technical expertise, but the kind of leadership that had made her effective in special operations environments. Her ability to communicate complex concepts clearly, her patience with student questions, and her genuine concern for their development demonstrated qualities that extended far beyond weapons. Knowledge. The transformation in the room was complete. The custodian had become the master instructor, and the cocky recruits had become eager students hungry for knowledge that could enhance their military effectiveness and ensure their survival in future operations. 3 weeks after the revelation that transformed Delta Company's understanding of expertise and respect, the weapons training facility had become something entirely different. What had once been a place of frustration and failure now buzzed with focused energy as 37 recruits applied techniques that elevated their performance beyond anything their previous instructors had thought possible. Private Chun completed his timed reassembly in 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Personal record that would have seemed impossible during his earlier struggles. His hands moved with new confidence, applying pressure points and alignment techniques that Rebecca had demonstrated during their intensive training sessions. The arrogance that had once defined his approach to military service had been replaced by genuine humility and respect for knowledge earned through experience. Excellent improvement, Rebecca observed, checking his work with the critical eye that had maintained weapons under combat conditions for over a decade. Your bolt carrier group seating has achieved proper headspace, and your trigger mechanism shows correct timing. This weapon is ready for combat deployment. The praise carried weight that transcended simple instructor approval, coming from someone whose expertise had been proven under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Rebecca's assessment represented validation that these recruits were finally approaching professional standards. Sergeant Torres watched the transformation with professional satisfaction that bordered on amazement. In 30 years of military service, he had never witnessed such dramatic improvement in weapons proficiency over such a short time frame. The recruits who had struggled with basic procedures just weeks earlier were now demonstrating advanced techniques that typically required months of conventional training to master. Master Sergeant Martinez has accomplished something remarkable, he confided to Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Patterson, who had arrived to observe the unprecedented improvements in Delta Company's performance scores. These recruits are exceeding qualification standards that were previously achieved by less than 20% of candidates. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson nodded with growing interest as she watched Private Rodriguez execute a complex malfunction clearance procedure that most soldiers wouldn't encounter until advanced training phases. The young woman's movements displayed the kind of systematic approach that reflected deep understanding of mechanical principles rather than rote memorization of manual procedures. The tactical applications she's teaching aren't available through conventional curriculum, Torres continued, his voice carrying the respect of one professional acknowledging another's superior expertise. Combat-proven techniques that address real-world situations these recruits won't face for years, if ever. She's compressing decades of learning into weeks of intensive instruction. Rebecca moved between stations with the fluid efficiency that characterized all her actions, providing individual guidance that addressed each recruit's specific weaknesses and built upon their emerging strengths. Her teaching style combined technical precision with genuine care for student development, qualities that had made her effective in special operations leadership roles. Private Walsh, adjust your grip pressure on the charging handle, she directed, demonstrating the subtle technique that prevented component wear during high-stress operations. Remember that combat situations require hundreds of repetitions, and improper technique compounds into serious problems over time. Private Walsh nodded eagerly, her earlier cruelty toward Rebecca now seeming like behavior from another lifetime. The woman she had once mocked had become her most valued instructor, someone whose knowledge could literally determine her survival in future deployments. The broader implications of Rebecca's instruction extended far beyond weapons maintenance. Her lessons about recognizing expertise in unexpected places, treating all personnel with dignity regardless of their apparent status, and understanding that competence takes many forms, had fundamentally altered these recruits' approach to military service and human relationships. The real test comes next week during advanced qualification trials, Rebecca announced to the assembled recruits, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced far more challenging examinations. You've learned techniques that will serve you throughout your military careers, but knowledge means nothing without the confidence to apply it under pressure. Private Thompson raised his hand with the respectful attention that now characterized all interactions with their former custodian turned master instructor. Master Sergeant Martinez, what should we expect during the trials? Are there specific scenarios we should prepare for? Rebecca's expression grew thoughtful as she considered how to prepare these young soldiers for evaluations that would determine their military futures. The qualification trials will test not just your technical knowledge, but your ability to perform under stress, solve problems creatively, and maintain composure when standard procedures prove inadequate. She gestured toward the weapons that had once frustrated them beyond endurance. These rifles will function perfectly if you apply the techniques we've practiced. But the examiners will introduce complications, environmental factors, time pressures, deliberate malfunctions designed to test your understanding rather than your memorization. Private Kim felt a flutter of nervousness despite her dramatically improved capabilities. The woman who had once seemed invisible had become the most important figure in their military development, and her approval meant more than any official recognition they might receive. Remember that confidence comes from competence, Rebecca continued, her instruction taking on the philosophical depth that separated great teachers from mere technicians. You've mastered these procedures through understanding rather than repetition. Trust your knowledge, remain calm under pressure, and approach problems systematically rather than frantically. The recruits absorbed these words with the intensity of students who recognized they were receiving wisdom that extended far beyond their immediate needs. Rebecca's lessons about maintaining composure under stress, thinking clearly when others panicked, and drawing upon deep knowledge during crisis situations would serve them throughout their military careers and personal lives. As the intensive training session concluded, Lieutenant Colonel Patterson approached Rebecca with the kind of formal respect that acknowledged both military rank and proven expertise. Master Sergeant Martinez, I've been observing your instruction methods and the remarkable improvement in these recruits' performance. Would you consider developing a formal curriculum based on your techniques? Rebecca considered the request carefully, understanding its implications for both her personal journey and the broader military training establishment. I appreciate the opportunity, Colonel, but my current role serves purposes that extend beyond official instruction duties. These recruits needed to learn lessons about assumptions and respect that are as important as technical competence. The colonel nodded with understanding that spoke to her own experience navigating military culture and recognizing the multiple ways that service members contributed to overall effectiveness. Perhaps we could arrange a hybrid approach, formal instruction supplemented by your current perspective on military community and mutual respect. The proposal represented recognition that Rebecca's value extended beyond her technical expertise to encompass leadership qualities and character insights that could benefit the entire training program. Her unique position as someone who had transitioned from elite combat operations to civilian support roles provided perspectives unavailable through conventional military career paths. I'll consider it, Rebecca replied, her tone suggesting genuine interest in expanding her impact while maintaining the personal stability that custodial work provided. These recruits have taught me as much as I've taught them, lessons about redemption, growth, and the possibility of positive change even after serious mistakes. Private Chun stepped forward with the formal bearing that now characterized his interactions with Rebecca. Master Sergeant Martinez, on behalf of Delta Company, I want to express our gratitude for your patience, your expertise, and your willingness to teach soldiers who initially treated you with disrespect. You've changed, not just our capabilities, but our understanding of what military service really means." His words triggered a spontaneous demonstration of respect from all 37 recruits, who stood at attention with the kind of genuine military bearing that reflected internal transformation rather than external compliance. The woman they had once dismissed as irrelevant had become the most influential figure in their military development. Rebecca acknowledged their gesture with the quiet dignity that had characterized her response to both mockery and praise. "Military service is about more than individual achievement," she replied, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had served with distinction in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. "It's about recognizing that every person contributes to mission success, treating teammates with respect regardless of their role, and understanding that expertise exists in forms you might never expect." As the recruits prepared to leave the training facility, their weapons properly maintained and their attitudes fundamentally transformed, the broader implications of their experience continued to resonate. They had learned technical skills that would serve them throughout their careers, but more importantly, they had discovered principles about human dignity, mutual respect, and the dangerous consequences of judging people based on appearances rather than character. The weapons training facility, which had witnessed their collective failure and subsequent redemption, would never be the same. Rebecca Martinez had transformed it from a place of frustration into a classroom where young soldiers learned not just about mechanical procedures, but about the values that defined true military excellence. Her legacy would extend far beyond the technical knowledge she had imparted. These 37 recruits would carry her lessons about respect, humility, and recognizing expertise wherever it existed into their future assignments, influencing countless other soldiers and perpetuating principles that would strengthen military culture for generations to come. In the end, the woman who had chosen invisibility as a path to healing had become unforgettable, not through seeking attention or recognition, but through demonstrating the kind of quiet competence and dignified service that represented the best aspects of military tradition. Her transformation from dismissed custodian to revered instructor proved that second chances, when earned through character and competence, could create impacts that extended far beyond individual redemption. The recruits who had once laughed at her uniform now understood that true military bearing had nothing to do with rank insignia or ceremonial appearance, and everything to do with the qualities of character, competence, and commitment that she embodied so completely. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that transformative day continued spreading throughout Fort Harrison and beyond. Delta Company had achieved the highest advanced qualification scores in the base's recorded history, with every single recruit exceeding minimum standards by margins that impressed even veteran instructors. Their success became legendary among training cadres, sparking investigations into what had produced such unprecedented results. Private Rodriguez, now promoted to Private First Class, found herself assigned to an advanced weapons specialist program. That would have been impossible without Rebecca's foundational instruction. Her technical reports included innovations based on field expedient techniques that she had learned during those intensive weeks, adaptations that were being studied for incorporation into official training curricula. The techniques Master Sergeant Martinez taught us aren't just about mechanical procedures, Rodriguez explained to a gathering of junior instructors who had requested briefings on Delta Company's success. They're about understanding systems holistically, recognizing interdependencies, and maintaining equipment under conditions that exceed normal parameters. Her presentation included photographic documentation of maintenance procedures that demonstrated precision levels typically associated with special operations units. The young soldier who had once mocked Rebecca's capabilities was now teaching techniques that elevated training standards across multiple companies, Private Thompson had volunteered for deployment to a forward operating base in Eastern Europe, where his enhanced weapons maintenance skills proved invaluable during joint operations with NATO allies. His after-action reports credited Rebecca's instruction with enabling him to maintain equipment functionality during extended field exercises that challenged conventional maintenance protocols. The diagnostic technique she taught us saved our mission during a 3-week reconnaissance operation. Thompson wrote an commendation letter that would eventually reach Rebecca through official channels. When our primary weapon systems experienced malfunctions due to extreme weather conditions, I was able to identify and correct problems that would have required evacuation to rear area facilities. His success in demanding operational environments validated Rebecca's teaching methods and demonstrated how combat-proven knowledge could enhance conventional military training. The young soldier who had once struggled with basic procedures was now maintaining critical equipment under conditions that tested the limits of human capability and mechanical reliability. Private Chun had been selected for the prestigious non-commissioned Officer Development Program, a career track that recognized exceptional leadership potential and technical competence. His selection interviews included detailed discussions of lessons learned about respect, assumptions, and the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of its apparent source. Master Sergeant Martinez taught us that competence doesn't announce itself through uniforms or titles, Chun explained to the selection board. Some of the most valuable knowledge exists in people you might overlook if you judge based on surface appearances rather than actual capabilities. His philosophical insights, developed through the humbling experience of discovering Rebecca's true background, impressed senior leaders who understood that effective military leadership required wisdom that extended beyond technical proficiency. The recruit who had once been the cruelest in his mockery had become an advocate for the kind of inclusive respect that strengthened military communities. Meanwhile, Rebecca's hybrid role had evolved into something unprecedented within military training establishments. She maintained her custodial responsibilities, which provided the psychological stability and routine she required, while conducting specialized instruction sessions that drew students from across the installation. Her unique position bridged conventional hierarchies and demonstrated alternative models of military service. What she's created challenges traditional assumptions about career progression and value recognition, observed Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a military sociologist studying innovative training methodologies at Fort Harrison. Her dual role demonstrates that expertise can be shared effectively outside conventional command structures, and that respect based on competence rather than rank produces superior educational outcomes. The academic analysis of Rebecca's teaching methods revealed pedagogical innovations that could revolutionize military instruction. Her emphasis on understanding mechanical relationships rather than memorizing procedures, her integration of real-world scenarios into technical training, and her focus on building confidence through competence had produced measurable improvements in student performance and retention. Colonel Patterson had formally documented Rebecca's contributions in efficiency reports that would influence military training policy at the highest levels. Her recommendations included establishing similar hybrid positions that could utilize the expertise of combat veterans who had transitioned to civilian roles while maintaining connections to military communities. Master Sergeant Martinez has demonstrated that traditional career models may not optimize the utilization of our most experienced personnel, Patterson wrote in her assessment. Her unique position has produced training outcomes that exceed CONVENTIONM programs, while providing valuable service to veterans managing transition challenges. The policy implications extended beyond individual recognition to encompass broader questions about how military organizations could better support veterans while maximizing their continued contributions to operational effectiveness. Rebecca's success had become a case study in innovative personnel management and alternative service models. The custodial staff throughout Fort Harrison had also experienced positive changes as word of Rebecca's background spread through official and unofficial channels. Maintenance personnel, food service workers, and administrative staff reported increased respect from military personnel who had learned to recognize that expertise existed at every level of military operations. The way soldiers interact with civilian employees has changed dramatically, noted Janet Martinez, the base facilities manager. There's more professional courtesy, more recognition that everyone contributes to mission success, and less of the dismissive attitude that used to characterize some of these relationships. The cultural shift represented one of Rebecca's most significant achievements, proof that individual examples of character and competence could influence entire communities and create lasting, positive change in organizational dynamics. As Rebecca completed her afternoon custodial duties, her movements still carried the efficiency and precision that had characterized her approach to every task throughout her military and civilian careers. The weapons training facility, now recognized as one of the most effective instructional environments on the base, gleamed under her careful maintenance. The rifles secured in their racks would face new groups of recruits the following week, young soldiers who would benefit not just from Rebecca's technical instruction, but from the cultural transformation her presence had created. They would enter an environment where respect was based on character rather than appearances, where expertise was recognized regardless of its source, and where assumptions about people's capabilities were challenged before they could take root. Standing in the doorway of the facility that had witnessed both her lowest moments of invisibility and her highest achievements as an educator, Rebecca reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had brought her to this point. The transition from elite combat operations to civilian service, which had once seemed like professional decline, had evolved into something far more meaningful, an opportunity to influence military culture and individual character development in ways that her previous roles had never allowed. Her legacy would not be measured in combat medals, operational achievements, impressive as those had been, but in the countless soldiers who would carry forward lessons about dignity, respect, and the recognition of hidden expertise. The recruits she had taught would become leaders themselves, perpetuating principles that would strengthen military communities for generations. The setting sun cast long shadows across the training facility, illuminating equipment that would soon challenge new groups of aspiring soldiers. Thanks to Rebecca Martinez, former Ranger, current custodian, and permanent example of how character transcends circumstances, those challenges would be met with better preparation, deeper understanding, and greater respect for the diverse forms that military excellence could take. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.